I'm sure everybody has heard of the live within your means quote. Now, what exactly does that mean? It means that you are living in a way that you can still grow. You're not exhausting your time, energy, or resources, or sacrificing so much that you actually contribute to your own sabotaging of your growth. And in this video, what I want to talk about is an introduction to shadow work, because I haven't really talked about that on the channel. It is a psychological concept developed by Carl Jung, and I'm going to be reading a little bit right from the horse's mouth here in the book Ion. And Ion is perhaps among the most influential books I've ever read. And the reason for it is because of the depth of analysis that it goes into in uncovering the darkest parts of our unconscious. Now, shadow work is a term that has been coined over the past 50 or so years by certain kinds of therapists and psychologists, etc. Consultations, people that provide consultations, therapeutic sessions, all of that kind of stuff. And what you're doing is you're intentionally confronting the darkest parts of yourself. Now, as Carl Jung states in the book here, he says that the shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. And to become conscious of it involves recognizing the dark aspects of the personality as present and real. And this act is the essential condition for any kind of self-knowledge. So, why is it the case that we have to have shadow work? And what exactly does it mean to go through shadow work, provided this extra insight from Carl Jung? If you do not confront the darkest parts of yourself, you're sure as hell not going to be able to grow the hell up. And that's what a lot of people don't want to see you do, is growing up. They don't want to see you grow. They don't want to see you rise above. They don't want to see you. And when I say they, because I've had this several different times on several different videos, when I say they, well, who do you mean by they? Well, they is anyone that wants to see the good, the beautiful, and the true completely destroyed. So, really, what's going to be most important for you in your journey into the dark side of yourself. Some people call it the dark night of the soul as well, when you actually confront these darker parts of you and these darker aspects of you. A lot of the times when we confront ourselves in the darkest parts of ourselves, it can shake our ego to a degree that is detrimental to our psyche. And in some cases, people develop a psychosis. Now, you don't want that to happen. And believe me, I was this close several different times in the earlier stages of my spiritual awakening, when things really started to change. Like, I really started to see the world differently. I truly felt as if I was entering into it. How do I describe it? It was like my physical body was always there, but I was merging into the universe, and I was acting into the universe for the first time spiritually. And I never got that feeling or anything remotely close to it prior to that. So I was actively emerging, like sprouting out of the universe from inside my body. And so I became conscious of my inside, like the internal quality of my life, far more. And I always had this intuitive understanding of that, but when I really started to confront the dark side, that's when things started to change. How do you confront the dark side? That's a good question to ask yourself, right? How do you confront the dark side of yourself? Well, you ask yourself what you're avoiding. What are you avoiding to put down? What are you avoiding to start? What are you avoiding? What kind of conversation do you need to have? And you know you need to have, but you need to avoid as well. You feel this need to avoid it. What is a what is contradicting your growth? What kind of emotions are you not actively addressing that are causing you distress? Are there any kind of dreams that you're having that have caused you turmoil? Are there any kind of significant impacts or moments or situations in your life that you don't want to think about? Now, a lot of the times, the tricky part of this is that people don't even know some of the things that they've buried until they start really, really digging. It's kind of like finding, has anybody gone like digging for fossils or anything? I went to this place where I was at an expeditionary learning school when I was a middle schooler, and we went to this place where we were actually able to dig up certain kinds of fossils and artifacts, and it was a really cool trip. It was a really awesome trip. I learned a lot, and I liked the hands-on learning aspect. And I was fortunate enough to have that kind of experience. But I remember when I was searching through and I was digging up the fossils and such, well, you dig a little deeper and there's like a bigger fossil that actually connects to this one. And then you dig a little bit more, and then there's another fossil that connects to that one. And then they start to form this archaic symbolism of what once was on the earth, right? It's the same kind of concept that you have to understand and address in your mind. Understand that 99% of your cognitive ability is unconscious at the moment. And so you're addressing a huge unconscious. It's almost like you're not only addressing your unconscious, you're addressing the collective unconscious as well. And so that's another part of the shadow. So Carl Jung goes on further and he says, emotion, incidentally, is not an activity of the individual, but something that happens to him. Effects occur usually where adaptation is weakest, and at the same time they reveal the reason for its weakness, namely a certain degree of inferiority and the existence of a lower level personality. He goes on and he says, these resistances are usually bound up with projections. Now he goes on further and he says that the conscious subject is unconscious of what it is he is projecting. Hence, one meets the projections. One does not make them. Well, that's pretty interesting, isn't it? So think about this. You are actively engaging in this thing called life, right? So hopefully, that's the hope, hopefully. If you're awake and not a dead walking zombie, right? So if you are going through this dark night of the soul, or you're going through shadow work and you're growing and you're going through a lot of pain and resistance to the change, that's good. That's good. When things are painful emotionally, that means that you're getting at something. Whether you need to pursue that you don't want to look at, or you need to let go of something or someone. Because if they're causing you unnecessary pain, that's a different story. But if it's pain for the sake of giving yourself compassion or growth, or you're having to deal with grief, or you're having to deal with some kind of emotional turmoil that you don't want to necessarily deal with, well, this is a great opportunity for you. And this is one of the reasons why I highly recommend everybody work out. And go work out with the intent, not necessarily to strengthen your body, which of course you're going to naturally do. But what I found is that working out is more so a component of understanding and breaking through the limitations that you place on yourself. Because oftentimes, when you go on a run, for example, let's say you go on the longest run you've ever been on. How do you think, like, when was the last time you went on a run or any kind of long endurance sport or whatever? And how did you feel at the end of that? And if you've never done that, then I highly encourage you to go run as much as you can for as long as you can and see how you feel at the end of that. The first time I ever ran 10 miles, I'd never ran 10 miles before in my life. And I wanted to quit at like mile 7. I was not having it. I was not having it in any way, shape, or form. I was ready to quit. I was just ready to be done. It was hot. It was a very hot day. I purposely chose the hot day, and I didn't bring any water with me because I wanted to feel the pain, which sounds really weird when I say it out loud, but I wanted to feel the pain of not having the water on this long run, but I wanted to finish the run. And it was like 95 degrees out, which where I'm from, it's pretty warm. And, we're nearly 5,000 feet in elevation, so there was the elevation challenge as well. But when I was on this run, got to mile 7, and I stopped for a moment, and I just felt like collapsing. And there was just something inside of me that was able to dig at like what I call the spiritual nuggets and of wisdom. And I was able to grab this spiritual nugget of wisdom that gave me the courage to continue forward. And guess what happened? The last 3 miles were easier than the first 7. And I don't exactly know why or how, but that's just the way that it was. I was able to just grab the spiritual nugget and was able to just go with it. And that spiritual nugget of wisdom was the pain and the grief at the time of just having to go through the pain of beginning. Because that's really what it was, just beginning again. I had felt like at this point I was a few months into being moved out all alone and for the first time. And I wasn't in a bad place. It was just, I was in a lost place. And I was able to just grab this spiritual nugget of wisdom, and everything started to make a lot more sense about my life. And so I highly encourage you, when you're working out, like, go to the point of failure. Go to the point to where you feel like you can't go anymore. And then see what is arising in your mind when you do so. What exactly is going on? And you can do this in meditation as well. Like, meditation is another way you can do this. It's not quite as intense, granted, which is okay. But it still gives you this ability to rest your mind in a similar space. Because when you're working that hard, working out, you're going to address some of the problems. And so what I started to do after that run is every time I would go on a run, because I was in the process of healing, right? I was like in my cocoon, healing, waiting to burst out. And in that cocoon where I was really building myself, I would address all of the grief that I had about my relationships in the past, or my family, or with women, or friends that have come and gone. It just didn't make sense. It didn't make sense to me how I was the one that was trying my best to do everything right, and yet this is what I was treated with. I was treated with betrayal. I was treated with being beaten emotionally by certain people in my family. I was and these are the kinds of things that you might be going through right now. And so that kind of resistance, you're going to have to address that. And you're going to have to notice it as well. Because a lot of times in my consultations that I do, something I've noticed with people is that I've used this analogy before. It's like we've had this spiritual knot in the mind, so to speak. And suddenly when we start to untie it, there's other knots down the line that we didn't even know were there. And so that often happens when you're going through and recovering from certain kinds of trauma or anything of the past, where it's almost like the more you see something for what it is at one aspect, then there's something else, and then there's something else. And then you'll get to a point to where you just feel all the pain, all of the suffering. Because that's another thing that Carl Jung was interested in, right? Is like, if enlightenment is all about bliss, and if enlightenment is all about joy and prosperity and all this stuff, wouldn't more people be enlightened, right? And so Carl Jung had this theory that we have to confront the dark side. And I genuinely believe that that is the case. And it's not necessarily for the fact of getting power from the dark side. It's understanding the power of the dark side and having respect for it, because that is something that you need to respect. And so what exactly are the projections that Carl Jung is referring to? Well, oftentimes the projections that we have are in people. And in dreams, you might not understand this, but in your dreams, it is the case that often for males, the shadow comes in the form of another male in the dream. And for women, the shadow comes in the form of another female. So the shadow itself in dreams is usually the same sex that you are, generally speaking. Because oftentimes whenever there's a dark force of the other gender, that's going to be the anima or the animus. And the anima is the totality of feminine experiences within the male psyche, and the animus is the totality of masculine experiences within the woman's psyche. So whenever the dark side of the anima and the dark side of the animus is going to be revealed to you in your dreams via the opposite gender, the opposite sex in the dream, whenever there's something bad happen. But this is something that we need to understand as well for shadow work, is that these projections that we have, and we can even project these things in people as well. What you're trying to do and what you need to do is to develop a relationship to it and cultivate a relationship to it, and then break it off and let it go, whatever it is, let it go, or nurture it. Those are going to be the two options once you cultivate that relationship, whether you're dealing with a projection or not. And this is oftentimes why one of the reasons why men and women can fixate on like one person is because they've projected their anima or their animus onto that other person so much that they think that their anima or their animus is this person, but it's not. The anima and the animus is something inside. It's what you could call an inner man or an inner woman, but it's not necessarily an inner man or an inner woman. It's a function of the psyche that you can relate to. This is one of the reasons why the alphabet community, our good old friends, the alphabet people, have, I think, such a hard time understanding and their own identity, is because they're projecting so much onto other things and other people, and they're trying to get the validation of other people so that they feel like they can know what's inside, that they really just don't know who they are. And I think that's one of the other main reasons for attention-seeking behavior. You're not going to grow with attention-seeking behavior. Why? Because if you're addicted to the attention-seeking of other people and the validation of other people, it's going to be very, very challenging for you to understand where you're actually growing. Because if you're if you're not looking for validation from God, you're going to be lost. You're going to be lost. So I hope this message was useful and insightful. There's a lot more to say on this topic for sure, but I hope that you guys gain some edification and some understanding of this. And peace be with you. Till next time.